A few more fellows interns that I'll step down for the next 2 weeks.
I understand that.
So this is kind of, I mean, maybe you're familiar with this.
I am.
Yeah. So yeah, feel free to like, I think it's a little professional to hard to manipulate, but he's going to record it like all the time. Take the time to clear on, just have questions. I have some that I asked. So if they need to, so that's sort of rising to the top. So it's good to know like how you can like so you need to like yeah, that's what we casual here to build great. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. We have food today. We have a smaller crowd. You guys might notice over the next few weeks, a lot of fellows will not be joining us because it's starting to be countdown to bar time. So, welcome to all the fellows that are here. There are 3 souls that are here right now. But actually, after next, so the last 2 weeks in July will just be interns only for that reason, because that'll be right during the bar time. Okay, so would anybody like to share what they've been working on either this summer or this past week since we last were here? Sorry? No one? Okay, well, thank you. Okay, I just want to please ask you guys to complete the service tracking form for anyone who's a PILI intern or fellow. We're going to do that for the first half. So if you've completed 200 hours or right around there, or if you're fellow 150 hours, then go ahead and get that done when you can. And then I'll send out another one in August for the second half with an evaluation also. And that's really good for us to know kind of so we can track individually for each agency, how kind of impact that's going on, and also then as an aggregate. Okay, let's see if you guys if you've pre-registered to attend the American Constitution Society How to Land a Clerkship panel tomorrow, don't forget, it's at Skadden Arts from 12 to 1:30. Lunch is provided, and it's not us that are running it. They've invited PILI interns and fellows, so I can't change the registration. But I have asked if there's a waiting list, if anybody is still looking to get on that. And then join us next Thursday back in here for our seminar which I've titled, Issues Involved in Farm Workers' Rights. And that's going to be more people from LAF, staff from LAF talk from their Immigrants and Workers' Rights Practice Group. And they're going to talk a lot about kind of the issues that are invisible with the kind of the invisibility of farm workers for this region of the country in the Midwest, and also some national trends. So I think that's it. I'm going to introduce you guys and welcome Margaret Kuzma. She's a staff attorney and a Skadden Fellow at LAF's Chicago Veterans Rights Project, and she's going to explain to you guys more about that project. Margaret is a graduate of this law school of DePaul University College of Law, and I just kind of want to list out, because I think she's a really good resource for people for interns and fellows also, but mostly interns who are interested in following a career in public interest law. She's, like I said, in addition to being a Skadden Fellow, she's has experience as a legal intern at the Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law, and also as an intern at the Business and Professional People for the Public Interest, BPI. And she was a PILI intern at LAF and a law clerk at the Office of the Illinois Attorney General. She's also a member of the PILI Alumni Network Leadership Council, so we've scooped her up. And I really encourage you guys to talk to her, and I'm hoping, and if there's time, she's going to share with you guys about the Skadden Fellowship process, some of that as well. So, Margaret, go ahead.
All right, so I'm Margaret, and this is going to be fairly informal. It feels weird for me to even be standing up here because I did go to law school here, so it feels very formal right now. But I'm going to try to give you a very broad overview on veterans law and what we do at LAF. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to interrupt. If I say something that's not clear, raise your hand, and we'll have it more of a dialogue. So I wanted to start out with giving you a little bit of background on LAF and how the Veterans Project fits into its overall structure. I apologize for anybody who has already worked at LAF or knows about it, because this is going to be a little bit repetitive for you. But basically, LAF is a legal services provider here in Cook County. We provide a wide range of civil legal services, and we've restructured so that we're in 5 different practice groups. So we do family law, consumer law, housing law, which is basically eviction defense, public benefits law, and immigration and workers' rights. I think I got all of them. So what do we do for veterans? Well, the answer is we do all of the above. Because veterans and military families don't come with just VA benefits issues. They also come because they're being evicted, or because they're struggling with a divorce, or it's a military family and the service member is about to be deployed and they need help with the legal guardianship. I mean, they have the everyday issues that people struggling have. As you all know, nobody comes to you in this line of work because they're having a great day. Everybody comes to you because they're struggling with something. So veterans, military family members, just the same. I think there are a couple distinct differences with this population, and I wanted to explore that a little bit with you and talk about why I'm so excited to help this population. I mean, one is the obvious that everybody thinks of when you talk about veterans. This is a population that volunteered to serve, basically so many of us don't have to. And that can't really be overstated. But I want to get a little bit beyond that and look at the more legal based issues as to why this is a really great population to serve. One, they're vulnerable. Okay, so everybody that you guys interact with who's living in poverty is vulnerable, obviously. There are a couple specific vulnerabilities that this population has. So when you're talking about current service members and military families, in Illinois, that's mainly National Guard and Reserves, but we do have some active duty. There's a Great Lakes Naval Base fairly close by. You have the risk of deployment. The National Guard, the Illinois National Guard, has actually been deployed a staggering amount in the past 15 years. We, as you may or may not know, we are actually in the longest term of the longest period of war that this country has ever been in. And less than 1% of our population is fighting that for us. So, that's a problem. And that puts tremendous strain on this population. So they are vulnerable. Clearly, if you have a house, if you're making mortgage payments, that can be a struggle for anybody who's living paycheck to paycheck. When you suddenly have to quit your civilian job and get called up to deploy for 12 months, maybe 15 months, that's a big change. And there are laws that will help you get your job back, and there are laws to help cover the pay gaps, but those laws have to be enforced, and that's where we come in. So they have very specific vulnerabilities. I'm sure you all have read about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, military sexual trauma. There's a lot of other issues that are kind of embedded in the military at this point that also cause unique stressors for this population and for the family members as well. If you have a loved one coming back from a deployment, you may get secondary PTSD. Your kids may struggle at school, and then you're going to need to talk to somebody who's helping out with school law, because CPS doesn't really think about the fact that a parent might be deployed, and that might be cause for some of the educational problems. So you can see the ripple effect from these wars, these deployments, and how these can shatter families if we don't have a robust social network that includes lawyers to help out. So that's the vulnerabilities. And then, of course, with veterans, you have similar issues with PTSD, all kinds of mental health illnesses that the VA wasn't even recognizing until recently. So we're trying to get those guys and girls into treatment and make sure they're getting the benefits. So those are the vulnerabilities. one of the exciting things about this population, though, both current service members, military families, and veterans, is that there are actually robust protections for this population, which doesn't exist in a lot of the clientele that we see writ large. But I think that because veterans are this subset of people that both sides of the political spectrum don't want to come out and be seen as anti-vet, we can actually sometimes get legislation passed that protects them, which is really exciting. So, for example, and I don't want to go into too much of the weeds on this because I could talk for an hour on any of these one subjects, but for current service members, there's the Civil Service Relief Act, the SCRA. It used to be the Soldiers and Sailors Relief Act. Basically, what that does is, let's say you have a military family, the foreclosure situation I was talking about with the mortgage. If you have a family, if you have a family member who's going through foreclosure, the husband or wife is the service member, is deployed, and they are on the mortgage, you can get that stayed. So that's a tremendous, tremendous remedy right there. So one thing I would say, even if you come away from today and you're like, wasn't really that impressed and I don't want to do military law, that's fine. But what I would say, if you want to do public interest law, ask in your intake if the person is a veteran or a current service member, or if anybody in their family is, because that can really fix your case for you, because there are these robust protections like the SCRA or the Military Lending Act or USERRA, which is the law that I referenced earlier that will get you your job back when you come back from deployment. So I would really stress that no matter what type of law you do, you ask that question, because it can be absolutely powerful. Just to give a really quick example, one of my first cases at LAF was a family that we had originally helped with a rescue fraud situation, settled it, they got enough money to get their dream house, and they were making payments, everything was going great. He got orders to go to Afghanistan. And he quit his civilian job and went to Fort McCoy or Fort Benning, I can't remember which, but he had to leave Chicago, so leave his family to go and start mobilizing and getting ready to deploy. And then there was the drawdown in Afghanistan, so his orders were put on indefinite hold. And they said, you will deploy, we just aren't sure when. Well, that meant his paycheck stalled, but he had already quit his job, and he was the only income coming into the family. So the wife did what any reasonable human being would do and called up the bank. And the bank said, oh, don't worry about it. We actually can't do anything to help you until you're 6 months behind. So, don't worry about it. Call us when you're 6 months behind. Hopefully you won't get 6 months behind. So she believes them. They send out all kinds of packets trying to volunteer him to go somewhere, to deploy somewhere because they need the money. They end up missing a couple months payments on their house, and he deploys, and then she goes in, and she's such a cute lady. She doesn't believe in online banking, so she walks her check into the corner bank to pay that month's payment, and they say, oh no, we don't accept partial payment. You have to pay us everything. Well, she doesn't have 3 or 4 months worth of mortgage payments, and they won't accept one, so she continues to get more and more and more behind. And luckily, finally, she called us, and we were able to say, this is a violation, and we could take you to court, or you could just fix this and fix her credit and give her a lower rate. And that's actually what they did eventually. It took a little bit of finagling, and I was a little disappointed because I would have liked to have gone to court on that. But it was, of course, better for the client to fix it fast. And we ended up getting her a 3.5 rate or something that I was pretty jealous of. So it ended up great, but it was this tool that you wouldn't have had if the service member hadn't been in the picture, and you wouldn't have known about if during intake you didn't ask, is there somebody in your family that's in the military? Because the client's not going to know, oh, by the way, I'm a military spouse, just FYI. I mean, the client's not going to know that, to say that. So it's really important that you guys ask the question, because there are these really, really powerful remedies that can be pretty exciting. So that's kind of my why vets. About me, my role at LAF. So LAF, in addition to their 5 practice groups, has task forces. And the task forces recognize that not everything, not every population fits neatly into housing law or consumer protection or one of these 5. And a lot of times people come to you and they have an eviction case, and it's because their veterans benefits got cut off. Or, I mean, it could be any slew of things, but there's a lot of overlap. So we have this task force structure to target vulnerable populations, and veterans is one of them. So I am head of the task force for my 2-year fellowship, which is going to be coming to an end very, very soon, which is sad. But basically what we do is we have somebody, at least one person from every practice group on the task force. And so we can track and make sure that we recognize the trends, we see what's going on in the community, we're aware that, oh, there's suddenly a ton of consumer protection issues. Is there more outreach that we should be doing to kind of nip these problems in the bud before they become actual legal issues? So we can kind of track that. As far as why I got involved with veterans, I'm not a veteran myself. I worked as the sexual assault response coordinator on 2 different Army bases before going to law school. I also worked with victims of domestic violence on the Army bases, and my husband was active duty infantry. So I do speak some of the language, but I'm certainly not a veteran. And I was a Peely intern, so I feel very grateful to Peely for the start that it gave me at LAF. So now that I've told you about all the general issues that military families and veterans have that are the same as the population at large, except they have a couple more protections, I wanted to talk about some very specific military related or veteran related issues. One of those, I'm sure you guys have heard about it in the news, is VA benefits. You probably read more about the backlog and the tremendous problems that the VA is having. But essentially what VA benefits are, and again, I could do a day-long training on VA benefits, so I don't want to get into the weeds, but VA benefits are monthly payments to veterans. There's both service-connected and non-service connected, and and not all veterans qualify for them. But they can be lifelong stabilizers for the veteran and the veteran's family. So they're very important. They can range from a couple $100s a month, depending on the disability, to if you're getting total disability, it can be a couple thousand. The non-service connected is a pension that is needs-based. So it's more akin to one of the social benefits, like public benefits. But both of them can really make a huge difference. And then there are educational benefits, there are dependent benefits, there are benefits for people who have lost a service member, but there's a whole range, and it's really too complicated for any one person to try to navigate themselves. So it's really helpful to have an attorney or somebody from a veteran service organization to help navigate the system. And we at LAF, we don't do initial claims to try to get people on the benefits, but we do the appeals. There are lots of, you wanted me to talk a little bit about the resources in the community. There are lots of agencies who, for free, will look at the veteran's file and see if they qualify for any of these benefits. And at LAF, whenever we always ask if the person is a veteran or somebody in their family, if we see that, then we flag it and we assess whether we think there could be a benefit claim, because if we have somebody who's coming in for an eviction, they're definitely not going to get the money from the VA in time to stop the eviction. Never will that happen. But it is a lifelong stabilizer, so down the road, it could be something that would mean that they would never be in that position again, which is, again, pretty exciting because it's not a remedy they have for a lot of people who are living in poverty. Let's see. So I can talk a little bit more about that if you would like, but I want to really get to some other areas that are I think they get a little bit less coverage as far as people in the community doing the work. One is military sexual trauma is fairly new. It's not a new phenomenon, obviously, but it's new that people are talking about it, and that the military is recognizing that it is a huge problem. That's obviously where my background is prior to law school, so it's been an area that we've really tried to focus on at LAF during my fellowship. It's not just women. Women and men have come to us. A lot of PTSD claims. There's actually a class action which LAF cannot be a part of because we're LSC, but there's a current class action going on right now because MST is military sexual trauma, but the actual disability based on it is usually PTSD. But the rates that the VA has been giving for PTSD based on sexual trauma versus PTSD based on combat have been wildly different. And so there's a class action about that right now, which is pretty exciting. There have also been various lawsuits to try to make it easier for people to prove that the sexual assault happened. In order to get the benefits, you have to prove that it was service connected. So you have to prove that it happened or was aggravated during your time of service, and that you're still separated from it. So if you were sexually assaulted in the 70s and you didn't come forward because they had absolutely no structure for you to come forward to anybody, you have to somehow prove that that happened. So now they have a system of, okay, we'll look at other issues that might prove that it happened. For instance, if it's a female, was there a pregnancy? Obviously, if there wasn't a pregnancy, it doesn't prove that it didn't happen, but they're looking for all kinds of other stressors. Did you suddenly start to go AWOL, which is away without leave? Did you suddenly, just start missing formations? Did you start seeing the chaplain a lot? So there are a lot of other things that you can use as kind of extrinsic evidence to try to make these claims a little bit easier because they have been historically pretty hard to make. The other thing with MST is, I mentioned going AWOL. There are a lot of people who, after it happened, really didn't want to be in the military anymore, or were not getting the services that they needed to cope with the sexual assault. So another area that we have really started focusing on, is discharge upgrades. And certainly not only ones that are related to MST, but I think it's a good segue because when something like a sexual assault happens, or you go to war, you're very traumatized, you come back, and you're suffering from something like PTSD, the chances that you're going to start committing mild infractions are pretty high. You're not going to show up to formation. You're going to go on leave and overstay your leave. You're going to start self-medicating with alcohol and get into some DUIs. There's all kinds of things that can happen. And unfortunately, what has happened to a lot of people who have these infractions is they get what's called bad paper. And that's where the discharge upgrades come in. And it's something that LAF has just started doing since I came on board. And as far as I know, we're the only game in town that's doing them for free. I think there are a couple private attorneys that will do them for a fee. But I think these discharge upgrades is an area where we're just going to see expanding need because of so many women and men coming back from the current wars, suffering from things like PTSD, suffering from MST, or just having some sort of disability, or it's difficult for them to adjust back to civilian life. With discharge upgrades, what happens, with bad paper, what happens is you can get out of the military with all sorts of different discharges. So there's the honorable discharge. That means you have access to any of the benefits that you would otherwise be afforded because of your status. There's general. You get most of the benefits except educational. There's other than honorable, where you don't get health care and you don't get the educational. And then there's dishonorable and bad conduct, and you don't get anything. So those are pretty strict guidelines for people. And if you think about very young soldiers who do something wrong and are told, look, we could prosecute you, or you could just sign and take this other than honorable, and they sign and take the other than honorable, not realizing that they're not going to get any health care, they're not going to get any of the educational benefits. A lot of times that's why they went into the service in the first place. And it can affect their employment prospects in the future because employers ask what your discharge was. It could be pretty unfair. So that's one of the things that we've really started to do. And we don't do all of them. Certainly there are some discharges that I think probably are warranted, but there are a lot out there where they were very, very much suffering from PTSD, MST, and instead of getting the help that they needed, they were discharged. So that's a really exciting area, but an area that is expanding greatly with more and more people coming back from war zones. So if there's something that you guys you don't really know what you want to do in the future and you're not sure where the need is, that's a huge, huge area because there's really very, very few people are doing them. Basically the way you do them, it's a paper application. And if you're within 15 years of the discharge, then you can go to a discharge review board, provided that you didn't get a bad conduct or dishonorable. And the standard is, was it improper or inequitable? So you're really making an equity argument that giving the service member this character of discharge is not fair. You have to look at their whole term of service. This is what was going on when, this and that. And they can be very small things. I mean, you can get a other than honorable for not showing up to formation several times. That just means, you didn't get out of bed, which if you're depressed or suffering from PTSD can probably happen, and you didn't show up. There's a ton of discretion. Yes, go ahead.
Is that the sort of claim you make then, that they were depressed?
Sure, if there's a diagnosis like PTSD and that affected what they did, we are absolutely going to make that claim. Yeah, absolutely. Because that goes to, it has to be improper or wrong. For the discharge review board, it's improper or inequitable, and for the BCMR, which I'll get to, it's error or injustice. So they're basically the same thing, but different words. But that goes to the injustice. This person was suffering from something that they incurred during service, and then they got kicked out because they were suffering from that instead of being treated for it. So absolutely, absolutely. Another thing is for the errors, a lot of times they're not following the proper protocol. So maybe they didn't get to talk to JAG. They were just told by the commander, these are your choices. You can either be prosecuted or get kicked out. Usually JAG is involved, but you can imagine, commanders can mean a lot of different things. Usually at this level, it can just be a captain who's been in, 4 years or so. So it's not like you're not talking about a general who has been around for a long time and really knows the ropes. It's somebody who has a tremendous amount of discretion, is really trying to hold a team together, maybe preparing for a deployment, and has this person who he sees as a bad actor, he or she sees as a bad actor, and they can't afford the time to spend. So it's really a system that can lead to a lot of results that are unfair and can lead to lifelong consequences. Obviously, all of the protections that I've been talking about and the VA benefits and everything like that, you don't get them if you have bad paper. So you're cut off from all of those potential benefits of being a veteran. And your family is as well, the dependent cut off. So that's absolutely an argument that we would make. So you can either go to the Discharge Review Board, or you can go to the Board for Correction and Military Records, and each branch has their own board. And again, it's the same standard, they just use different language. It's error or injustice. The DRB, the Discharge Review Board, is military. The BCMR, the Board for Correction and Military Records, is actually civilians. For both, the approval rate is abysmal. So that's the big downer of this being an area that needs a lot of help. And we have struggled with that because we've been trying to get pro bono attorneys, and pro bono attorneys don't necessarily want to work really hard on a case that has a 5% chance of winning, which is a lot of the statistics you see out there. However, I would argue that the 5% number comes from veterans trying to do it themselves, because nobody is doing this. And I brought just, I could pass them around, but really, I just wanted you guys to see the link. So most veterans that come in to see me that have already done it themselves have just filled out the form. Because that's what it says online you have to do. You fill out the form, which is, you know, one of the standard veteran forms, and then your case will be assessed. Well, this is the DRB form. It's 1 page and a back, and then instructions. That's it. So if you're making an equitable argument, telling the military that they made a mistake, probably filling out just a form without attaching any of your military records or making any sort of argument whatsoever is not going to get you anywhere. You can get it upgraded if it was something under the Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That can work form-wise. Anything else, I have never heard of somebody winning by just filling out the form. The Board for Correction of Military Records is even worse. It's just this. The back is instructions. So again, like, yeah, it's a 5% win rate, but like the vast majority of people are doing this by themselves. I mean, it would just be absurd. It would be like somebody filing I don't know if you guys have done asylum law, but like an asylum petition by themselves, filling out a form. I mean, it would go nowhere, you know? So I think even though the rates are abysmal, there's a ton of need out there, and they're actually pretty fun cases. You get to, at least I think it's fun, you get to look through somebody's military record and make an equitable argument. You have a lot of freedom on where you want to go with that, as to, look, this guy or woman was a really good soldier, and this is what happened, you know, and these are the infractions, and this is what they're tied to, and that shouldn't characterize the rest of their life. And unfortunately, like anything with the VA, it takes a long time to get the result. Not actually as long as VA benefits at this point. I got a result back from the Board for Correction of Military Records in 10 months. And it was the first one that LAF had ever done. It actually wasn't a discharge upgrade, but it was the same process. It was for a widow. And we had to change the status of his death because they said that he was off duty when he was not, and that made her not eligible for all kinds of things. But it was the exact same argument. It was error or injustice. We won, and I've been shocked because I knew that she would be eligible for the educational benefits for either herself or her kids, and a monthly, I think she gets about $1,500 a month now. But the military has since then given her over $150,000 in back pay and death benefits and all of these other benefits just because, you know, we won at the BCMR. So it's a really powerful weapon that has absolutely changed her life. So, and it was a really fun brief to write too, just because, I don't know, I think equitable arguments are always fun. You just have a lot of leeway on what you can throw out there. So I'm really pushing those because there are so few people doing them, and there's such need. So that's the overview I wanted to give you guys. If you guys have specific questions about military issues, I'm happy to talk to them or talk about them. If you would rather have me talk about the fellowship process, I'm happy to do that as well. Yes?
When you are doing an intake with someone who is a veteran, I'm just thinking, like, because I have one right now, like, would it be good to ask him how he was discharged and if he has paperwork on that? If it's a foreclosure case.
I always ask when they served, and you know, I don't always ask the character of discharge, just because sometimes it gets a little touchy. But if it might mean that he's eligible for some benefits, I think it's worth asking, absolutely. And you know, the foreclosure, if you can get him some extra money every month, again, won't happen fast, but down the road it could really help. But I always ask when they served and, you know, what branch, and often I'll ask the discharge. I mean, it kind of depends on what way the intake is going. And we usually ask for military documents like the DD-214, which is the standard form that they get when they are discharged. So if I don't ask about the discharge, it's going to show up in the DD-214, so then I'll know. Yeah.
Mine really just went blank. Okay, I remember now. For people who are called to service, I guess they're, I don't know the correct term, but if their unit is being deployed, you said once they quit their job, once they come back, they're supposed to be rehired by the company that they work with?
Yes. So there's actually two different laws. There's the there's USERRA, which is the Uniform Service. I'm so bad with this. Anyway. USSER, I believe, and it's basically the reemployment law that says if you leave, not only do you get your job back, but you get it back at the level that you would have gotten or you would have been had you been working that whole time. So if everybody else got a raise, you are supposed to be hired back at that raise. But it has an elevator principle that can also go down. So if everybody else got a reduction because times are tough, then you're going to get the reduction too. Usually that doesn't happen, but it is a really powerful law. I mean, there are some notice requirements, and you have to go back within a certain amount of time, but it's really powerful. And as far as employment goes, it's one of those cases that companies really don't want to go to court over. You know, it looks really bad if the veteran comes back and you just didn't want to hire him or her. That's not a good case that you want in front of a jury. So they're great cases. I said there's a couple different laws because there are also state laws that parallel USERRA that you can bring as well. And unlike many employment law cases where you have to bring them within, there's a very short statute of limitations, USERRA generally doesn't, and you also don't have to have, you know, it doesn't have to be Walmart. It can be a very small company. So, yeah.
Does LAF take most of their cases for active duty military members as opposed to reservists?
No. Nope.
Are active duty, I imagine they're more protected, there's more protections for active duty than reservists?
Well, yes and no. I mean, if the reservist is called up, is activated, then the protections are essentially the same. But if it's a reservist who's just going for the monthly drill, then a lot of them don't apply. But we would, you know, if they have a legal issue, they still get the veteran status preference that LAF gives. It's just, you know, it fits into our population. And one of the reasons I really wanted to focus on military families, current service members here in Cook County was because there were so many reservists and National Guard members, and even though they're not always 24/7 in the military, I feel like in many ways those families are far more isolated. So, you know, when you're on an active duty base and your spouse deploys, everybody else's spouse just deployed. You know, you have all of these services on the base available to you. The schools that your kids are going to know that there's been a deployment. There's just, I mean, it's a whole community that has had to mobilize. Whereas with National Guard and Reserves, they don't, you know, the neighbor may have no idea why the spouse is suddenly no longer around. Same with the teachers, same with everything else. And there's also less opportunity for the spouses to be told about the SCRA protections or the Military Lending Act protections or any of these others. So, yeah. Yeah.
Based on what we've talked about, it sounds like there's not very many people doing this type of law in the state. Can you talk a little bit about specifically who's doing it and kind of what areas they're doing so people
Sure.
know?
Sure. So John Marshall, which is right across the street, has a really big pro bono network, and they mainly do veterans benefits appeals. So a service member can come in, get their cases screened by the law students, And then they have this huge pro bono network of attorneys who have volunteered to basically be on call, and when they have time, they can take up a case to try to argue to get the veterans benefits. So they did that. The ABA has actually very recently launched a new project. I think they have a training later this month, and it's really going to get up and going next month, where the VA and the ABA have decided if you get a lawyer at the very beginning of the process instead of at the appellate level, then that can streamline the process, and hopefully you can get, the argument that you need up front rather than having to kind of go back. So they're trying to get pro bono attorneys to take it from the inception of the case. So basically where the veteran service organizations step in. The veteran service organizations are not lawyers, but they're very familiar with the process, and they are at all the VAs. I think the Illinois Department of Veterans Affairs also has some VSO officers, and they can do all of the initial claims as well. And they do take some appeals as well. And there's a bunch of organizations. There's American Vets. There's a bunch of different veteran service organizations. As far as I don't know of anybody who's doing discharge upgrades right now in Illinois. There are some national organizations like Swords to Plowshares, does a lot of them, but as far as people in Illinois, we're the only ones who I know of. And then lots of people do, housing law, obviously, foreclosure defense, anything like that. I don't know how many organizations ask about veteran status. It's really something that we're trying to push people to do because it can make such a big difference. Yeah. And as far as healthcare goes, there's the VA hospitals, obviously, but then there's a bunch of other organizations who are trying to reach out to veterans and family members who may not qualify for the VA. So because of their discharge status or because they're new vets and they don't qualify. There's vet centers. We'll see, they're related to the VA, but they can see people with other than honorables. They can see family members, which is really important for a spouse who's dealing with somebody who is suffering from PTSD. It's really important for the kids, as you can probably imagine. Deployments are very hard. There's Rush Hospital has a new Road Home program where they give free services to military families, no questions about discharge status. So there's a lot of agencies out there who are recognizing the problems of discharge status and are trying to kind of do workarounds and make sure that the service members are getting at least some sort of treatment. But that still is a work in progress.
Recommendations for someone who wants to get into this area of law?
Sure. I think if you can intern, obviously I intern a lot of places, but I think it's a great way to see if you are interested in that area and kind of get your feet wet a little bit. If you can even just volunteer for the VA benefit claims and the discharge upgrades, they're largely paper applications, so it's not that hard to pick up a piece of it or to help with a portion. As opposed to if you're in school and you're helping with eviction, it's kind of always, you have to be in court and it's always an emergency. That's a little bit easier to volunteer piecemeal on these longer cases. So that's always an option as well. And there are, John Marshall, LAF, there are a couple other places that are doing this work. I also would say, try to get to know a little bit of the military culture. I'm not a vet, but it certainly helps that I can speak the language a little bit. When I use like the phonetic alphabet to spell out my name for veterans on the phone, it's like the sigh is palpable because they feel like they're talking to somebody who they don't have to explain absolutely everything. I mean, when you're in crisis and you have to explain to somebody what a staff sergeant is, then you really feel like you're back at the drawing board and it can be overwhelming. So learning a little bit about the culture is really helpful as well, and there are lots of military 101 things. If you're interested in a specific issue like military sexual trauma, there's a ton going on there. If you guys haven't seen the movie Invisible War, I would highly recommend it. I think it gives a pretty good overview. I mean, There are some things that I would change, but I think in general, it's really good. Definitely not like a Friday night happy movie, but I think it's on Netflix, so yeah, I would check that out. Oh, another organization that I should have mentioned that does legal work and helps in this area is HDA, Health and Disability Advocates, and they do really fantastic work. They help with the Warrior to Warrior program, which is where veterans go out and assist current units, National Guard units, and so they're there to help with any sort of disability issue or legal issue that comes up. So we get lots of referrals from them. So that's another agency that you could look into potentially volunteering for. And I know that CGLA as well does expungements, and that can often be an issue for veterans. So they go to a clinic that we also go to. Local shelter. So yeah.
But your project is looking for interns and pro bono attorneys to help with
Yes.
the issue? Okay.
Yes. LAF is always looking for people to help. So
Talk a little bit about developing a Skadden Fellowship.
sure. So as I said, I'm a Skadden Fellow, so I've been doing this for almost 2 years now. I started in September of 2012. And I actually applied for both an EJW and a Skadden, so if people are thinking of doing one or the other or both, I'm happy to talk individually about both of the processes. For Skadden, the basic framework is you develop a 2-year project. You can either develop it in conjunction with an organization, or you can just develop the project and pitch it to an organization, but you do have to have an organization to sponsor you. For 2 years, Skadden pays whatever a starting attorney at that organization would make. So a lot of people ask me if I get Skadden pay. I do not. That would be very unfair to the other people at LAF. And then after it's done, I also am not beholden at all to Skadden. In fact, Skadden really wants its fellows to stay in public interest. So I'm not going to go and work for Skadden after this either. I'm going to continue with public interest. In general, what Skadden is looking for is people addressing an area of need, either a population or a specific legal issue that is affecting people living in poverty. And then you need to identify, okay, so there's this issue. Why am I bringing this up now? Why is this a huge area of need at this moment? Why this place? So if it's going to be Chicago, why Chicago? What makes Chicago special? And then why you? You know, how are you equipped to address this? And then why your organization? So those are kind of like the main things that you want to hit. And it's the same with EJW. They want to find somebody who's really passionate about the issue that they're proposing, and who is creative, is going to be able to basically in 2 years get something up and running. So you need to be independent but at the same time work within the structure of the host organization, and you need to be really dedicated. So those are kinds of the things that you have to, I know I just said like a bunch of buzzwords that people go out all the time, but those are the aspects that you really want to highlight when you're doing your application. And I would just say, you know, I have prior experience in the military community, and that really helped. But I know somebody who, my year, who got a Skadden doing discharge upgrades, and he didn't have prior experience. He was not a veteran, and he was never at all affiliated with the military, but he had done an internship with an organization and had handled discharge upgrades and really fell in love with them. So, you know, it's not necessary. It's not necessary that you have a huge link, but you want to make the argument. You know, either you've done the work, or you know, this is why you're the perfect person for it. For me, it was really helpful, and you know, it's what made me so passionate. I don't come from a military family. I would know nothing about the military had I not married into the military. But you know, it really opened my eyes, and that was something that I could speak to with a lot of honesty about, you know, going through a deployment and seeing what I did to families and you know, seeing people who lost loved ones and how they coped. So, you know, if you can tell a story like that and match it up with a legal issue, I think it can really help. Scouting applications open, I think you can submit it in October, but I don't know the exact date, so you'll want to get on the website. It's a paper application, it's 3 questions, which doesn't sound like a lot, especially if you're also doing an EJW, which is usually due in September. EJW is really long. I thought once I had gotten my EJW in, the Scouting would be total cake because the EJW is like 15 pages long. But it's really hard to be passionate and describe what you're going to do for 2 years in, you know, 3 500-character or 500-word answers. So definitely give yourself some time. If you are at all interested, you can't start thinking about it too early. Brainstorm with your organization, brainstorm with professors, with other people in the community. If you're looking at Scouting, they definitely want you to contact current Scoutins and former Scoutins and talk about what worked and what didn't work with their projects. And everybody I talked to was more than happy to make the time to talk to me. I remember being really nervous calling people because they, you know, some of them had been attorneys for years and years and years and were doing amazing things, and they were always extremely humble and really, really saying, well, this is what I like about your proposal, this is, you know, something that maybe you would want to change, and that was hugely helpful, and I think made my program stronger. Questions? Basically, you turn in the application in October, and then you get if you make the first cut, you get an interview. The interview is with Susan Butler Plum, who runs the fellowship, and then a partner at Scouting. And then after the interview, they do another cut, and then they do a final cut. I think they choose like 26, usually a year. If anybody has other questions, I'm more than happy to help. I would absolutely not have gotten the fellowship without help from other Scoutins. So I'm always available via email or whatever to.
Any other questions? All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Marty.